Wow, there we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode, Vagabond Dog Industry Chats. This week, we've got Chris Priestman, writer from the game you saw me playing earlier this week, Disco Elysium. Fantastic CRPG with a very distinct artistic style, but what I'm more interested in is a very distinct writing style. Chris, thank you for coming on. I guess I'm not doing a very good job of explaining what Disco Elysium is yet.
That's an art by itself.
You're right. It is a detective game.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the simplest way to put it. Yeah.
But it's like it's a role-playing game. Your character is this disheveled man who has these like personality aspects within him that speak within the dialogue of the game to him, almost like separate characters. They tell you things, they lead you astray, they give you little bits of intuition and sensation as you play through the game, and it's a fantastic experience that is quite unlike anything else that I've really played before. I played plenty of CRPGs before, but this one is a very unique beast. And more to the point, it released, what was that, 2019 released, and then just a week ago it got an update which brought voice acting to the mix, which was a fantastic addition for all of the smooth brains like me who get a little tired reading constantly.
There is a lot of reading.
There's a lot of text, man. But that's, I mean, is there a better way to explain this game? Because
I could give it a go. It's a detective RPG. And one of the things you mentioned is that there's, I think, 24 skills that we call them, but they're basically voices inside our main character's head that speak to you, which kind of replaces the traditional party system you'd have in an RPG.
Mm-hmm.
It also ties in with the themes of the game, which is about exploring this guy's identity because he's forgotten who he is due to going on a crazy week-long or so bender when he's supposed to be investigating a hanged man case. So when you join him, he doesn't know who he is, and you have to try and piece together his life by exploring a kind of rugged coast of a district of a huge city called Revachol. And it kind of spirals from there.
Right.
Basically.
It's on the surface, looking at it, it appears like a very it's got this broody, mysterious facade to it. But as soon as you get into it, there is some very well done comedy. It is a surprisingly funny game, or maybe I have a horrible sense of humor. But I don't I don't think it's that's entirely the case. What is it about those two elements that you think works so well with the game?
I think it was very important for us. We do touch on some very serious themes, but no one wants to just stay the game could last for 30 to 60 hours, whatever it might be. No one wants to be within that mood, that tone and mood for like that long.
Right.
And if you want to engage people, if you want to make them cry, you should make them laugh first. That's kind of a rule. And if you want to make them cry, if you want to make them laugh, you need to make them cry. So we kind of want to balance that. Like if you're gonna come in, this guy's wrecking his life. You don't want to just be grim. Oh, this is horrible. This is not very inviting. If you can make a joke out of that, and it is kind of an inherently funny in itself if you know where to find the humor. And I think a lot of what what gets people into it at the very start is, did you kill yourself with the lamp, the light at the start? A lot of people do, because you can turn a light on. I think you can try and grab a tie that's spinning around with fan blades on the light. And if you don't have much health, depending on your build, you can have a heart attack when you try to grab the tie and lose all your health. And you literally get a game over within the first 2 minutes. So a lot of people have that experience. And It's also good for like just getting the game out there because people will then want to share that experience with other people. Like I just started playing this game, and within 3 minutes I died, and there's kind of like a hook for people to get into it, which was kind of intentional. We kind of wanted people to be able to share their experiences with the game in that way. So it was important, like I said, to get the funny bits in there because otherwise it's just grim, grim, grim. I don't want to play this anymore.
That's I did not know that was possible.
It is possible.
Yeah, no. The thing that caught me in the first scene was looking in the mirror versus not. That was when I first realized how much variation there was going to be in the game. And it's actually it's just interesting. My first game, I also have a die immediately scenario, and it was a really important to communicate to the player the gravity of choices, no matter what. I mean, it's much better presented with the mundanity of grabbing your tie and having a heart attack. But I have always found that with branching experiences in games, there's always this like tough line between player awareness of cause and the balance towards immersion, the balance between immersion and I guess understanding, right? Like knowing what caused that character to have that heart attack versus the lack of immersion of being like, you know, having a warning or you know, stat indicators or these kinds of things. Disco approaches this a lot of subtle ways with like the skill voices appearing in the chat or not chat text periodically without you know, they might not appear, they might appear. You don't know if they're not going to appear. But then there's the harder ones, which are like the choice based. Here's the dice roll. This is your general odds of succeeds. What do you think the best ways that Disco approaches the issue of player awareness of cause before consequence?
I think you pretty much hit them, the most obvious ones. So, for example, with the tie, I think one of the skills comes in and mentions something like, this might be dangerous if you tried to do this. So then you're already aware that this might not be a good idea. And if you press on, you have to make the decision to get the tie, but it tells you that we have white checks and red checks in the game, which are basically just dice rolls. And you can increase your chance of getting a dice roll through various means in the game, up in your skills, or maybe having a certain experience or having a piece of knowledge might help you sometimes. Or wearing certain clothes as well actually helps you sometimes. So then you have to make the decision to roll the dice, essentially, knowing full well that you could fail. You may not know that failure might kill you, but there's like, so we warn you, and then we make sure you this is a dice roll, and then luckily, like at this point, it's very like at the start of the game. So if it happens, you've only lost like no progress.
Right.
Later in the game, you'll be much more aware of how all this stuff works, especially if it's already happened to you that right at the start. So when you commit to these things, you should know already by that point. Also, you probably would have increased your health or whatever it might be, so it's not so much of a risk. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we do, but those are the most obvious ones. I think we try to make it quite obvious when those things are happening. Like when you commit to an action, sometimes we give you the option to pull out and give you a bit of a warning, and you can come back to it later. Mm-hmm. And they also get the red checks. So the difference between a white check and a red check. A white check is you can try again later to do this thing, whatever it might be. A red check, you only have this one opportunity. So you have to decide whether you want to risk trying to do this thing at this time. And even if you succeed, sometimes it's not always a good thing. Sometimes it's actually better to fail, and you get like either because it's funny or because the outcome isn't as good as you think it's going to be. Right. So red checks, you kind of learn you learn that it's not always going to be a good thing necessarily if you do succeed, but you only get this one chance to see what's going to happen. So it's up to you, but we always give you like other options too. There might be like 3 or 4 different options. You don't have to go for that red check if you don't want to.
Now, when it comes to design, like I guess fundamentally red checks are easier to build in the game, right? They're they're absolutely binary. There's a fail, there's a pass, and then there's everything leading up to it. But I'm curious how you guys tackle the writing process for the white checks, because that is the harder of the two, in my opinion, where the player can attempt something, fail, retry, have a change, retry again, without it feeling sort of like each attempt is superfluous, like it doesn't matter. How did you find the process of tackling either of them?
So white checks, well, to be honest, it kind of applies to both. We do have like a binary, like did you succeed, do you not succeed? And usually with both options, not always, but quite a lot, we'll have like you succeed, and then you have like maybe a little bit of dialogue, and then you have like 4 options of how you succeed, and then it's the same with failure. So if you do fail and you come back to a white check, it will know that you've already failed once. So we've written another thing that will happen, and it will acknowledge your previous failure. And then we have like a second one and a third one. So we write all those different things, and then eventually it will just kind of repeat. But it's very unlikely that you'll like do it that many times and have failed by that point, because we also show you when you can, like, I think hover a cursor over it, certain like I can't think what they're called now, like stat bonuses or whatever, that kind of thing, that help you to overcome that white check. And also you can't try white check immediately straight again. You have to have each white check is tied to a skill, and you have to have either increase that skill level by 1 at least, or found something else in the game world that gives you more of an advantage to succeed.
Right.
So when you come back to it again, you will have a better chance of succeeding. That doesn't mean the dice, the RNG won't work for you, but you will have a better chance that time.
Right. And so I guess that that barring from retry without improvement is sort of essential to prevent the player from getting to the repetition immediately. But also I guess it creates additional writing opportunities at the lower stages of failure. Do you find that the challenge of creating stat and skill based branches at this stage, I mean, you guys have finished the game, but what was the process like going from from just understand, everybody kind of understands, here's a bunch of dialogue options, this dialogue option leads to this dialogue option leads to this, versus the sort of, for lack of a better term, quantum thinking of potential states based on skill checks and dice rolls? Is there much of a difference? Do you view it any different now that you've gone through the game?
So hang on, to get the question right,
Sure.
was like, is it how we developed and figured that out, or
more yeah, I guess I'm curious to understand how you guys approached it, but also has your perspective on creating branching experiences focused on skill checks changed much over the course of development?
I think it was from the start, because well, not me personally, but the original team anyway. I came in a bit later, but they'd already been playing within the world that we set the game in as a tabletop setting. So they're coming from it having like those kind of dice rolls. So it was immediately in there. The design document for the game already had all these things in there. It originally did also have like proper combat, turn-based combat, that was taken away, and we became aware that these skill checks were a way of doing combat, but also applying that kind of turn-based thinking to other actions, and it's way more interesting, and you could make it all dialogue focused that way. The skill checks are the most important thing to make it like narrative only, if you know what I mean. Like, you don't have to have real quick reaction speed or anything like that. You don't have to be tactical in combat, and when there is combat, we don't make it so like you can die, or and the game ends, like, or anything like that. Like, we make failure part of it as well through these skill checks. Like, that's what they introduce. Like, you can succeed and fail and still progress. That's the important thing for us. So yeah, I think they're just like, I think from the very start they've been very crucial to the whole makeup of the game. We've probably learned how to better use them, and we have more rules on how to build them. But fundamentally, I think they've always been very important to us.
Right. And did your approach to or your understanding of that depth change throughout development at all?
I
You
guess so.
personally?
Oh, for me personally, yeah, I had to learn it all, and then it kind of my like instinct is to try and find ways to push it further. But you quickly learn why those rules are in there. But it's also like it seems complex at first when you're trying to build these things, like all these branching narratives, and like is this going to check right, and which skill do you use to check it against, and all this kind of stuff. It feels complex at first, but when you get it at some point, it just feels really natural, and it's like, oh, and it feels almost like natural thinking. Like, of course, that's how, because it's all based in your character's head, especially, and everything is tied to like an action that you do with your hands, or you do with your mouth, or you do with your brain. It kind of feels one to one, almost how you are as a human being. Like all those things you do every day, and how you interact with people. You don't really think about it, but we've kind of broken it down and put it through these skill systems and the dialogue and everything. So yeah, it kind of becomes it's complex, but then it becomes instinctive almost.
Interesting. I wonder how much of the you are now manually breathing it starts to develop when you sit in that world too long.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just go check my breath every time.
Yeah. The yeah, you mentioned that you had come onto the project after it had already begun, or been quite a bit in development. I'm curious what it was like onboarding into the world and the lore that Robert Kurvitz had set up with the original text and the role playing.
Um, there's much more than you think. Like there's like everything. Like I said, they've been making this world. I think Robert's been making it for like 20 years. And he's a man who works very fast and very thoroughly. And like the things that are in Disco Elysium, the bits of lore that are in there, like it's such a small amount. Like I can't stress enough how small it is. And no one knows it all. Like I think Robert has books and stuff of all this stuff. He doesn't have it in his head. I think he has a lot in his head. But yeah, there's a lot to learn. But I'd already started learning it way before I joined the team. And the other thing is like a lot of it is, well, he was described to me as like when you're writing something within this world, you think that maybe there's certain touch points and facts and or whatever you have to do, but actually, well, they are touch points, but you can kind of improvise within that. It's kind of like it was described to me as like jazz writing or jazz playing. So you learn what works in that world, and then you can just come out with it. It takes a while to get there, obviously, but it's not as strict as you might think. It's not like you can't say this because this didn't happen on this date or this didn't happen in this region of the world at this point. You can kind of fill in those details. There's enough gaps in there for you to use when you're writing.
Right. And I mean, well, and I guess also the way that the game is presented, none of it is like factual historical text, or the bits of the game that are like informational are very are far fewer than the character driven pieces or perspective driven pieces. So it's not necessarily, I guess, as crucial to communicate hard facts.
This is the other thing as well, which is kind of like an almost eureka moment when you realize, because you're seeing, for example, one of the skills is encyclopedia, which you take to mean that it's telling you facts about the world, which is true. However, it's filtered through our main character's brain. So they're only facts as far as he knows they are facts. They're not actual necessarily facts of the world. They're facts as he knows they are.
Right.
Which, when you realize it's that, you can kind of like, well, if he doesn't know that, you can just assume that he thinks it's this, rather than actually be like that's how it is. If that makes any sense.
No. It's quintessential unreliable narrator stuff. Like
exactly, yeah.
It's fantastic. Which is, I mean, perfect for a player stepping into a game world that they know nothing about. You know, it's a great framing device for it. but I'm curious, sort of, if you can tell me a bit more about the onboarding process. You said you started getting into the text before you even came on to actually writing for the game. Um, what sort of process was it for you? And then once you got the job, what opportunities did you find stepping into the world and the lore?
So the onboarding process was like, oh, so I did start learning the game world beforehand, which came in handy because I started helping out with like putting together like a glossary and that kind of stuff, or adding to the glossary, I should say. Which is a good place to start, just trying to learn the world and stuff. Um, and one of the main things I did when I was on the team was to help out translation teams, which means trying to learn as much as possible and then relay it to other people and help when they ask questions to get them answered for them about the world, because otherwise they can't do a good translation if they don't understand it all. So my job was to put together lots of documents after having learned lots of stuff to then relay it to other people, which means having to understand it and break it down in a manageable way, obviously. But I don't really know. Like, it was just a case of learning as much as possible and making as many notes as possible and consulting as many documents as possible, and having access to all these things obviously makes it a lot easier. And making sure, like, I was quite stickler with making sure everything was consistent. I read it through the entire game several times, looking for inconsistencies through everything. And it's everything from like making sure dates are correct to, like, at one point we decided when you refer to Kim Kitsuragi, your partner,
Mhm.
sometimes, so that our rule was that Harry can call him Kim, but your thoughts and Sai can only call him the lieutenant. So that was one thing we made consistent throughout the game. It's just like that. I'm trying to remember everything we edited. There was so much, but yeah, the process was just taking it all in, and then there was no easy way of otherwise of doing it.
Right. I mean, there's another interesting part of the consistency in there is you took these steps for factual consistency and informational consistency across the game. But I'm curious about the stylistic consistencies that are within Disco, because there is absolutely a poetry to the text. And I want to know how much of that is just Robert's style, your style, whoever's writing in at the given time, just coming through, or did you guys have a style guide? Is there a specific mantra that goes into writing for Disco Elysium? Specifically, like the expression of sensations in particular is amazing. It is phenomenal writing, and I'm curious how, with multiple writers, how it managed to stay consistent.
The quick answer is lots of editing. That's the quick answer. I think we practiced something. What was it called? I can't think what it's called. Mass editing,
Okay.
maybe, is what we call it, which is just so it comes from Robert. Like this, he has a style that he likes, and it's not just his style; it's his style that he's adopted for this world and this game.
Mm-hmm.
At the start of any project, like he's like wrote a book in the world too. Like, he would go through and figure out what words and what themes and all that kind of stuff ties in together. So there's that kind of guiding from the very top, and then it kind of trickles down. So um, beyond that, you then break it down to, like, each area will have themes and will have certain, like, I don't know, inspirational quotes. It'll have words, all that kind of thing broken down that kind of lead the writing for that area. And then break it down further, you have characters in there. So each character has their own kind of things they do, or, say, or whatever. So everyone knows these things. And usually, I think, or at least for Disco Elysium, each mostly area. So like the Doom commercial area, for example, was all written by Helen, I think. So that was all consistent within her style. And then you had other areas done by different people and different characters and stuff. So that's when you start getting to see before we've edited anything, there's going to be differences. And then everyone has to then go over everything and talk to each other and communicate with each other and see if we can tie in different things in different areas, different characters and different events and that kind of stuff. And it's just a case of editing and editing and editing and editing. And the more you edit, the more come together. It's just like pulling a string and it's coming together more and more. And that's mostly it. But in terms of the writing style as well, there are some guiding principles. Like one of them is the balance between fascination and information. So we want to have more fascination than there is information most of the time. And I think the writing you're referring to is more of that.
Yeah.
How it's been described to me is like information would be like a washing machine manual, and fascination would be like the sounds of someone having sex in the next room to you. Like you're not getting much information, but you're getting fascinated by it. So we're getting more of that like the fascination from it, which is like more evocative and appealing to like senses and dreams and ideas rather than being like hard information.
Right. I mean, it makes sense that that's the direction that the game was thrust into, because I mean, at its core, I guess if things were done informationally, it would be pretty stock. I mean, I feel cold. I'm hungry. He's looking at me weird, right? Like it's not enough to captivate, I think, an audience. But I'm curious, and I apologize, I don't know a ton about your development history prior to this game. So had you ever worked on a writing team this size before and had that kind of editing process?
I have worked on games as a writer, like really small games. I've helped out as a consultant on some stuff for narrative and writing. But this is like the first like big team. And I think it's because the team is made up more of actual like people who've written books rather than, we do have coders who've worked on games, but these are people who have written for other things and come from other walks of life. And like the kind of the big thing at Exam is trying to bring in people who don't usually have the opportunity to write, to tell their story or whatever it might be, because that's the most interesting stuff. Like if you just get a writer who, for example, has just worked in one thing, they only have that experience to draw upon. So we try and get some people who have like written from, or not written, but have experienced different walks of life that maybe we haven't, and so we can bring those in. And I think that's partly why the game has such like a diverse range of topics that it touches on. Anything from like cockatoos to, I don't know, depression, whatever it might be. It's also also because a lot of the writers are like addicted to like hitting the random page in Wikipedia and just like learning something and like being able to not focus. But then when you can't focus on writing, you go and read something, and then you just bring that into the game as well. And in a lot of games that wouldn't work, but because we have a game that's set inside someone's head, it kind of does work, because you can have all sorts of weird thoughts in your head. Like if it's a thought in your head, it can be a thought in your character's head. And the other thing as well I'd add, just as I thought of it, was like the writing that we have makes sense for the kind of game that we made. You couldn't have this, like, because it's an isometric RPG, you have to rely on the writing to bring the world to life, because you're not right there in it. You're a little bit further out. So
the art does a good job.
The art does a great job, and we have great animators and great artists and stuff like that. But there's like we don't animate absolutely everything, because that would be ridiculous for the budget and time. So we rely on writing to do that instead. That's where those writing can come in and fill those gaps, which is important, because people might try and do that writing style in a different kind of game, and it's just not going to work.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to put that in Doom.
Exactly right.
It's actually, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that you had traditional book authors, and Robert is a novelist, for lack of a better term. Previously, I'm very glad to hear that the game has found such tremendous success, where it seems in modern world, and to record, books aren't. Books don't have that kind of audience anymore. If games are a way for writers and novelists and fiction fans to find an audience now. Do you think there? I mean, and Disco is among the best ever done. But are there trade-offs? What are we gaining and losing? Transitioning from printed word to clicky click.
I like that. I don't know what we're losing. I don't know. I think the great promise of like the 20th century novel was that it was someone's like big like idea coming out. Their big like, I'm going to tackle the world. I'm going to show you what the world is.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. In a way, I guess you don't get that, but I think you just gain like 6 or 7 or 8 people doing that in one project, which is a plus, I think, probably. And I think it's just a case of like a lot of people are tied to that idea of the, and it's very 20th century now they think about it, rather than like, I think RPGs or games or narrative games or whatever are where those stories are going to come from. We're hoping that there's going to be more studios pop up that are like ours, that want to be able to tell stories in this way, because you have to go meet the audience. There's no point in being like, oh, I'm going to change the world with my novel if no one's going to read it. Like,
Right.
it's just, that's just how it is. You have to go with the times, you have to go with what people are doing and what they're reading. That's why the game like has, what side am I on? Has like the text coming down this side or this side, because it's like Twitter, because that's how people read. People don't read books and they say that, oh, I don't read anymore, but they do read Twitter, they do read social media, so that's how you do the text for them, and it kind of feels satisfying to go up and down. It feels familiar to people to do that, because that's how they read text these days. So it's just a case of coming meeting the audience and giving them what they're familiar with, and looking at how people interact with words and text these days, and trying to do that rather than trying to be like, no, I'm stubborn, I want to do it this way, but knowing full well that people aren't, you're asking people to do something they don't normally do.
Right. I mean, to me, the thing I've been noticing is that games, because of their necessity for involving other people and their concession to player habits. I did, by the way, brilliant. I didn't even notice the scroll methodology of displaying text, but absolutely brilliant, because it worked.
That's how you know it worked. You didn't even realize.
Yeah. But because of the nature of how many people are required to make a game, I mean, like, even with a person like Robert in the team, you know, I think games sort of destroy that old monomyth of like the one great creative mind here is the genius and it's in this book and you enjoy it and that's it. Were we wrong to have that belief as a society if this is the outcome that we've reached?
Who knows? I mean, maybe. I don't know. Like, society has just changed, I suppose. It's like we're in the information age now, and things are fast and different in comparison to where we were like 100 years ago, which is, you know, we were just, a lot of people couldn't read. They weren't even literate. You know, they were stuck doing horrible jobs and stuff. And then the mid 20th century, we got to the point where more people had time to read, so they were reading, and that's when you get all the big novels come up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever it is. And now people like the internet comes along, and like, who wants to read a book when you can go on the internet and interact with people, actual people who aren't, you know, there. But yeah, we do miss something. Like, novels are great. You don't get those like one-on-one with someone's head in their mind and that kind of stuff. But it doesn't mean we can't replace that and put it somewhere else, or, well, not replace it, but find it somewhere else. There's no reason why we can't do that. And I think that's something that games can do. It's just a case of making sure, like, I love like narrative games, but sometimes I don't even want to read text in the game when I'm playing, like for example Doom. I don't want to just sit there suddenly like pause the action, I need to read this. Like, it's not going to happen. You need to be able to bring people into that experience and want them to be part of that experience, and not interrupt something else that's happening. It has to be a core part of the experience. And I think that's probably why narrative has been pushed aside and not been as good at times in games, because it has just been more of an afterthought a lot of the time. I've worked on games where I've been brought on as like a narrative person, like 8 months or 6 months
You're
out
right.
of a release, and you're like, well, you're going to add a story now? You've already made the game. Like, it's ridiculous, but you do what you can.
Right, and yeah, and then it ends up in audio logs that get buried in trash
Yeah.
cans, or yeah, classic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like people think books are dead. Books are not dead. I mean, let's be. There
Mm-hmm.
are people still do know how to read, and there are books being bought and everything. It's just a smaller audience now. But like people think books are dead. Very frequently the CRPG is a genre that keeps it feels dead sometimes, and then every couple of years a game like Disco or Divinity 2 comes along, and it just reminds us like how amazing the genre is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fantastic. I'm curious, is there anything about the genre in particular that you think is endearing, or what makes it last when so many different types of narrative adventure games, and you kind of fall by the wayside, like the classic turn-based JRPG has kind of like absolutely fallen to the action RPG, but the CRPG or the tactics RPG, they kind of endure, and I'm curious if you think there's any elements within the genre that like has made it sticky.
Hmm. Um, it might just be that they can tell stories. Like going back to like Baldur's Gate, which is the classic everyone loves. It was the story and the characters. You can really vibe and understand them, and get to know them and feel like you do know them. Um, and I think it may be because of the slight, like the distance of that kind of genre. Like you're not right, because you're not right in the action. You don't feel like you need to perform the action. And as soon as you get there, and when you're in first person or something, you then need to animate everything. So that
Mm-hmm.
becomes the focus of the game. It's not about the writing or something. You can obviously have dialogue, but like you you're just watching people go meh, 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 in front of a screen, which isn't as exciting as hitting them with a sword. Like that's just a fact. So I think having that bit of distance potentially is what helps us so much. Like because you have to fill those gaps in, like I said, with our text, with our writing, you do that. You don't animate everything, you don't need to, because you can't see it anyway. Like a tiny little animation of someone doing it, you can't see it. And it's with everything with games, it's like it's balancing how much you can afford with versus what your ambition is for it. Like ideally, if we had maximum budget, we would animate everything. Why not? We would still want to do the text, but because we can't afford to do that, because we don't have the time to do that, you fill it in with other things. Um, Outside of that, I don't know. I think it might just be that, and then you go further out, you get like tactical games, I guess, don't you? I suppose,
Right.
but yeah, I guess that. I'm trying to think.
I know. You have a page called Warp Door. I glanced at curiously. It's a bit of a game curation page. So I'm curious if you have any CRPG genre recommendations or deep cuts that we might be worth checking out, other than Disco
Oh,
Elysium.
um, yeah, I think so. If you've never played a game by the Catamites, I would recommend playing any of his games. They are one of the classics is called God, I think it's called now Space Funeral. I think it's been so long, but yeah, he kind of made some off kilter like RPGs and like riffs on the RPG that weren't actually RPGs but presented themselves as RPGs. One of his quotes I like from him, he's this Irish game dev, was that his favorite thing about JRPGs was the void space outside of all the rooms you go into, and that's
Uh,
kind of where he kind of hangs out, and that's where he approaches games from. He doesn't like the positive space; he likes the negative space, and he just made some really bizarre RPGs and RPGs that are about how ridiculous RPGs are at the same time. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. Warp Door's been going for like nearly 7 years, so there's a lot to remember.
No, fair enough. I mean, do you want to give the audience a cursory information? I checked it out a little bit. It's a ton of posts of really odd games I've never heard of.
Mhm.
what is there? Is there a curation process to it? Is it just a bunch of games you guys like? Is it?
It's mostly just games that we like. It's important, like, so I started it with Tim W, who started indiegames.com like in 2007, something like that. And we've always been like, we've had a few other people join us, but our main thing is like finding small games that no one else is finding, and like we have our own specific taste. Like you can probably tell if you get to know me or Tim which game we have posted, like who's posted which game, because we just have a specific. I like the really weird shit. Tim likes kind of like more action based stuff. Um, yeah, it's just mostly. I think people appreciate the kind of stuff we find. We go out of our way to find stuff that really isn't being found by other people when we get time. I've had less time recently, obviously,
Right.
but Tim's been going for it still. And we're actually doing a collaboration soon with someone to appear at an online festival, which would be fun to have
Fantastic.
a game space there. So it is nice to like give a shout out to these other people coming up with these cool ideas and stuff. I always appreciate experimental games and people just doing something that's completely wild that you've never seen before, especially if it comes together so well. And surprisingly, a lot of the time it does. These people making games for themselves just pull it out of the bag.
Do you think it's important for I mean I'm going to call you an indie dev, but it's important for devs and indie devs curating other indies versus relying on the media or worse the platforms to do it. um it's it,
I think it helps. I don't. I mean, I've been in the media too. That's where I originally came from. But I've always came from that perspective. Like I've always been looking at smaller games over the big games. That's where I found like my niche, and that's where I covered. But I think like yeah, I guess it is important because a lot of smaller devs will be looking out for what other peers are creating, and it doesn't fit in with the narrative that bigger sites like to potentially do, and like they're not covering game jams these days or something. But game jams is where you'll find some of the craziest games. Like I think I was one of the first people to find Super Hot when it was made in the 7-day FPS game jam, and like I don't know if people are going to find those games anymore because they're not being covered as much, which is fine because they've moved on to other things. But it means that the that does have to be fulfilled by someone else, I suppose. So why not indie devs? Like we are the people like supporting us peers and finding these ideas so we can use them ourselves or build on them or whatever. It makes sense to me.
Right. I mean, it does. The why not indie devs? Because I mean, we all are infinitely busy making games.
Well, this is why Warped was good, because my problem before was I always tried to write about a game and explain why it was good, which
Right.
is important to do when you can. But for something like Warped, it's just literally like it might as well just be a Tumblr page. It literally is like a link, a picture, or a video, and to the game page and a link, and that's it. That's it, really. That's what you need. The creation is the important thing. Even if it's just like I'll share games on Twitter, I'll hit a retweet button, and that helps. Like that can be enough sometimes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, any boost amongst the noise is helpful, but I really do appreciate as a player, I really appreciate something like Warped War, where I can go and find some new weirdness. And I actually I also appreciate the no critique approach, because whatever, if the game attracted you, odds are it's gonna attract somebody else with some
There's always
similar
a fun in
taste.
that. Like, why did this person choose this game? Why is it worth playing? And then you discover it yourself. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's not for you. Who knows? But there's a bit of fun in that.
Right. Topic I like to ask all my international guests. Well, I mean, first, you're in UK, Bristol. Have you always been there?
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm curious, what is the game dev scene like in Bristol?
It's pretty good actually. There is like a game dev like meetup and stuff like that. There's quite a few big-ish like indie studios here, and they're slowly growing a bit bigger as in the more recent years. Um, yeah, I've been to like small game jam things as a judge here, and it's a very supportive little community. Um, the bigger people here are Auric Digital, which is where my girlfriend works. She's a marketing manager there. There's also other studios I can't remember the name of, but they are part of like there's a Bristol game dev like meetup and the newsletter that goes around, and we all support each other there. And it's a game jam, so people get to know each other. It's really nice. But we're also connected to like other people in the UK as well, which is good.
Is there anything particular you've noticed about UK design sensibilities versus the rest of the world?
Good question. I'm not sure actually. I always think, see, my research has always gone back to like in the 80s when there was like a big British game dev scene, like literally bedroom coders and stuff like that. We have people like, nope, I'm not gonna remember his name, but there's people who've made like these games that are about really like there's a lawnmower game from the 80s that just seems so British to me, like you're just mowing your lawn, and I think you're doing it competitively against your neighbor. But nowadays they're trying to be a bit more commercial, obviously. But there's still that sense of like British kind of isms and it being a bit silly. They don't take themselves too seriously. I think it tends to be more, at least on the smaller dev side, it tends to be more management, tactical kind of games. There are a couple RPGs, but they tend to be more manageable in scope versus like American games or other European, the French dev scene. They love like really beautiful out there kind of adventure stuff. But the British dev scene tends to be more like, yeah, tactical management, that kind of thing, I think. Right. In my experience. That's very generalized, obviously, but off the top of my head.
Oh, that's good. I'm always curious to hear about the differences in dev communities, just because there's just small little pockets of little difference here and there, and it all comes together to make our wonderful game palette. I guess as we get near to rounding things out, tell me a bit more about the final cut. You got voice acting in the game. But I've always considered a strong difference in dialogue that's meant to be spoken and dialogue that's meant to be read. Was there any of that consideration during the original writing process?
I don't think so. But so that is a good question. Like, I don't think it was. So obviously we're trying to write within like how a character, like I said, we were trying to write in how a character would say something. So that was always in consideration. We always treated our characters as real people in our heads, so we tried to respect them like that, so we wouldn't say anything they wouldn't say. But I don't think it was really considered how these things would sound read out loud. And there is a small video out there on the internet. We got a rapper to do you know, have you met Measurehead, the really huge guy? So the guy who does his voice, there's a small video of him doing the voice in the original, because in the original game we had a few of like characters doing like greetings and that kind of stuff, not the full voice acting, but he was trying to say some of the things that he says, and he just struggles so much, and some of the words he has to say, like, yeah, that's not easy to say, is it at all? But we didn't really change anything. Like, we have over 1 million words in the game. Not all of them are voiced because the main character isn't voiced. But we didn't really change much. We changed a few things as we were recording them to how the actor wanted to say them, and then edited it in the game. But not much has changed. Like, to be honest with you, I don't know how it kind of worked out so well. It probably helped that we had actually like a theater director who did the voice direction. That probably helped. And we had like really, really good voice actors in. But in terms of the writing side, it kind of just seems like a bit of a fluke, to be honest, that it worked out.
I mean, that's good. Yeah, I was curious if you guys had to do any writing changes, but I mean, acceptable concessions for getting a good performance out of the voice actor instead. There's no way to turn off the voice. Is there a way to turn off the voice acting?
There's 3 different modes. So you get the full voice acting. Then there's, I think it's called psychological mode, which is it just your voice? If voice is in your head, it might be. I don't think there's an option for just the actors, like the other characters. I
Right.
mean, and then there's the third option is just like the greetings, like the original game was, if you want to have that experience. Yeah, and we realized when the game originally came out that when people were like streaming or replaying the game, that they were trying to read out everything for their audience, and people were literally losing their voices trying to read out everything. So we were like, that's one of the big things we want to get in. And we didn't realize like how big or how much of a reception it would get initially. Like when we announced it would have voice acting, people seemed to be like well hyped about it, and we were like, oh, we knew they would be, but not as hyped as they were. It was quite mad. Like I guess it's because there's so much reading to do in the game, and there is a lot of words to read out in the game. So yeah, it was nice to see. Like we quickly moved that up the feature list, like full voice acting, because people were like, oh, okay, full voice acting, that's huge, okay. And I guess it helps that like we really put a lot of time and effort to make sure every single character has a voice actor that matches them, and they have different accents because the city it's all set in has like a load of different cultures and all that kind of stuff in there. So there's different accents, people from like France, people from America, people from like parts of Asia, all over the place. We put a lot of effort into make it sound as realistic to the world as we could.
Yeah, I know it's only been a week since the release, but I mean, I've been preaching about voice acting, I mean, I've always done text heavy games, and I am totally aware of the burden that puts on the player. And so, as an accessibility feature or an ease of use feature, I'm curious if you guys have seen, what sort of response have you seen to the addition of voice acting in the game?
I've seen a lot of people saying they're actually going to play the game now.
It was cool. I bought it, but man,
yeah, it's fair. Like some people like they just don't want to read that much, which is fair. And having it read out to them is like a lot of people will listen to audiobooks now, and I guess it's kind of like an extension of that, really. And it is. I think it's the full thing is 1,200,000 and odds, maybe 300,000 words, which is a lot of words. I think it's the equivalent of like I think it's all Harry Potter books. Is the same amount of words altogether. Although obviously in a single playthrough you wouldn't hear all of it. But yeah, I mean it's been good. We are planning on adding, I think, more accessibility things as well because we really want to make sure that as many people who want to play it can play it. Like it was a big thing for us to try and get it on as lower spec PCs and stuff that we could quite early on, and we're still trying to push for that. Like we're still trying to get it, make sure the performance is better and all that kind of stuff, which is difficult because Unity sometimes doesn't want to play like that, but we're doing our best.
It's a wise approach rather than rushing headlong into new content that can there's all kinds of risks that come with that, where if you append it to the end of the game or inject it somewhere in the middle, it's like not everybody's going to get to play it, versus something that's really going to reach a majority of people and let people enjoy all of the hard work you guys put into it. Very wise. I applaud it.
Thank you.
Yeah, but is there anything else in the final cut? I know we voice acting gets the big hype, but
yeah, so voice acting, with full voice acting, we added, I think it's technically 5 new quests. There's 4 that we shouted about, 1 for each political alignment that you can have. And then there's a 5th quest that addresses the issues that people were having trying to get past a certain part of the game. So if you struggle, I think it's basically you need a shivers check to get somewhere in the game. And if you haven't got skills high enough or you're struggling, there's now a way to get through it by doing this other quest that we added. What else is there? Oh, so over the past year, I added, with the help of all the translation teams, well, not me personally, but I was managing them, all the translation teams, we added like 8 language options. And one of the cool features we have is the language switch feature. So you can choose 2 languages in the options. And I press the button, so say English and Russian, you can literally go from English text, press a button, and it's all Russian, which is it's insane. It's insane when you see it actually happen.
I'm deleting Duolingo as we speak.
Yeah, the only thing is like people have asked if we're going to do voice acting for all these languages. Like English is enough. There's no way we can do anything else.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So we edited a lot of the game, typos and all that kind of stuff. We also there's new characters as part of the new quests. There's loads of new animations that we added. One of our favorites was Kuno. If you get to a certain point in Kuno's conversation, he kind of like leans in and whispers to you, and that wasn't animated before, but now he kind of like leans in and does this.
Oh, gotcha.
And we find it really cute that he just leans in and starts whispering to you. But there's like little animations that we added to that. All the new quests have like big animated scenes, or they add stuff to the UI, or they change your portrait or something like that. So we wanted to like with all the new quests we added, they changed the world or the game in some way, some significant way. I feel like there's other things I'm forgetting, but we did add things and improve the game as much as we could in the time we had.
No, it's all fantastic. And I guess I mean I hate asking this one, but like, what's next? What are you doing next? What are you personally doing next? What's the rest of the year for you?
Hopefully getting a jab and getting out of lockdown. That would be great.
Fair.
Yeah, we're working on things. That's all I can say.
Good.
We're still working hard. Partially on Disco Elysium and partially stuff. Forgot what the question was now. My brain's gone.
It's enough. We don't need spoilers, and I'm not here to extract glorious juicy tidbits. No, I guess I just want to thank you for coming on. Anything you want to tell the people? Advice for new game devs, or tell them what to go play.
I would say don't make a huge million-word RPG as your first, or even second or third project. Don't do that because that's mad. Definitely don't do that.
Good advice.
Keep it small. Always keep it small. Something you can actually manage, and also plan out your time. Like, I also am a producer, so I am also like very hot on deadlines and making sure everything is done on time. That's very important. Right. As good a producer is rare, and you should hold them close to your heart.
Right. Well, it's important to mention the keep it small comes from some experience. This project, although it may have materialized in front of people overnight one day, it did not. It was not made in one day. This was a lengthy project, and
I think 5 years. Well, yeah, 5 years for the original game, and then another 1.5 for the rest for the final cut.
It's a long time. Worth it. Worth it.
Yeah, luckily it went down well.
All right. I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And guys, check out Disco Elysium. And take it easy, everybody. We'll see you all later.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.